Kindly go ahead, Mr. Sheldon. We are live already.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure seeing all of you online. I welcome you all to this very important conversation. But we will begin by having our the opening song, and then of course we'll have the opening prayer too, which is the yes, that was a Great Nation by Timmy. Straight away, we will go. Yes, please, you will recite after me. O God of creation,
Creation.
direct our noble cause,
Direct our noble cause.
guide our leaders right,
Guide
Guide our leaders right.
help our youth the truth to know,
Help our
Help
youth.
our
Help our
youth
youths the truth to know.
in love and honesty to grow,
In love
In love.
and
in love
honesty
and
to
honesty
grow.
to grow,
and live in just and truth,
and live in just and
Leading
truth.
just and true.
great lofty heights attain,
Great
Great
lofty
lofty
heights
heights
attain,
attain.
to build a nation where peace and justice reign.
To build a
to
nation.
build
Build
a
a nation
nation
where peace
where
and justice
peace
reign.
and justice shall reign.
Fantastic stuff. All right. Once again, I welcome you all to this important conversation. The topic, of course, is truth, trust, and justice. A deep dive discussion and reflections on the 25th of February 2023 presidential election. That is an election that is still being talked about. The fallouts the fallout has been mind blowing. So much to discuss, and we have important people here, some seasoned professionals and experts to dissect and do justice to this topic. It's good to see some of the people I personally know here. A wonderful to the topic, and we will all live here with a good action plan. I will at this point welcome Mrs. Ogechi Abu to do the welcome proper and then the introduction of our panelists at this important conversation. Mrs. Ogechi. All right, I'm not sure Mrs. Ogechi is here, but if she isn't, so let me go ahead. Mrs. Ogechi is not here, as I've been informed.
I can take that.
Fantastic.
So,
fantastic stuff.
Hello
Thank
to
you
you
very
all. My name is Solomon Animashal. I am your host today. I welcome you all to this conversation, and I hope that the conversation we're going to have today will not only be meaningful, but it will be one that will provide insight, the necessary insight to this very important discussion. In terms of the format of the show, we are going to have the guest speakers who will deliberate on specific questions that have been prepared for the show. Allow me to introduce you to the guest speakers we have today. On the roster, we have Dr. Samuel Oguche, who will be running the first session. We then have Mojirayo Ogulano Konga, who will run the second part. And then Gloria Mbayam Balason, the third part. and then Mr. Joseph Ote. The fourth part, we will then move on to session 2, time permitting, where we have Dr. Samuel Oguche, Mojirayo, and Gloria, who will participate in that session. And the final session will be opened up to the audience for questions to be posed by the audience and some audience engagement. We will then round off the show with a final word by each speaker for 1 minute, where they'll be able to sort of give their closing statements, and then we'll look to wrap up the show. So hopefully we can get through that in the time allotted. I will encourage everybody to try to be concise and operate within the time stipulated, and hopefully that allows us to get through the show. So without further ado, I'd like to open up the first session by calling on Dr. Samuel Oguche to deliberate on the first part of the topic. Dr. Samuel, I believe you are the coordinator of Yaga Africa Center for Legislative Engagement. Welcome to the discussion. I'll now hand over to you and allow you to deliberate on the first part of the show. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. It's my pleasure being with you this evening, and I'm going to, in the next few minutes, lead discussion on issues relating to the 2023 general elections, especially as it has to do with the election manipulation risk index, which was released shortly before the elections in 3 parts. And again, we'll also look at Yaga Africa's post-election observation reports. A press statement was issued, and some other incidental. Looking at, in the build-up to the 2023 general elections, Yaga Africa, in partnership with a few other CSOs, released the Election Manipulation Risk Index, which has been debated, at various avenues, and thereafter after the election. Now, one of the key issues emanating from the report is the issue of INEC capture, and we are going to talk about how it played out during the election. If you watch closely, issues relating to attack on INEC staff, election materials, and compromise of INEC officials featured prominently during the election. We had projected that there are some states that will be high-risk states, some medium risk, while others were low-risk states. And mitigation measures were recommended. Now, during the election, we saw clearly that there were traces of INEC capture, and these are activities that are targeted at weakening or suppressing the operational independence and neutrality of INEC. For example, in Adamawa State, we can recall what happened there, that the issue of neutrality of the REC was in doubt. We look at Sokoto State, where the REC was suspended, because we had raised issues that one of the indices, one of the indicators of INEC capture is deployment of RECs with partisan background and deployment of other RECs that had no experience in election management prior to their deployment, appointment and deployment. In Sokoto, for example, we saw how the REC performed, and the 3 senatorial district elections were inconclusive. Eventually, he was suspended. Now we go to Adamawa State, where illegalities featured prominently. The resident electoral commissioner making a declaration why collections were still ongoing. So we had double-decker illegality there, in the sense that the REC is not legally empowered to make a declaration. And the second arm was a declaration why collation was still ongoing. So you can see traces of INEC capture that had been raised in the Emory report. Then, of voter suppression. This featured in almost 30 states or more across the Federation. We saw instances where voters were not allowed to come out freely to vote. We take example from Lagos. In fact, in the build-up to the gubernatorial elections, the state elections, we had issues of sporadic gunshots, some festivals being fixed on the day of election. These are activities that are targeted at, driving away some voters. And people have raised concerns about it. Then another one is election technology. We can all agree that one of the issues or innovations that build citizens' trust in the electoral process is election technology, like the beavers and the IREV. So Nigerians, especially the youth, had high expectations, high hopes, had a lot of trust in the process, and it was going on smoothly. The beavers was tested. Young Africa observed the testing and mock accreditation, and it all seemed good. But during the presidential election, we saw a lot of hiccup. And thereafter, Nigerians started expressing displeasure, the trust they had weakened or dwindled, and that affected the subsequent election to a large extent. And the question now is, who is resisting election technology? INEC, that had assured Nigerians that everything was fine, was now the one seen to have resisted technology and subsequently arguing that transmission of results to the IREV is not a mandatory requirement. Now, the question is, how do we now build citizens' trust in the electoral process? I've heard people say, look, Nigerians no longer have trust in democracy. I beg to disagree with that, because nobody is agitating for an alternative. We all believe in democracy, but how do we go about it? These are the issues coming out of the failure of technology during the election. In fact, Young Africa observed during the election that beavers failed. It was fixed. In some places, replaced. Then the question is, when you had two sets of elections, in fact, three, because of National Assembly, Senate, and the House, on one hand, the presidential election on the other hand, why did transmission to the IRF fail on the part of the presidential election? These are questions that Nigerians have continued to ask, and INEC has not been able to give credible information to the public. So that information gap is there. Then reliability of election technology is another thing that comes out of the last election, because we have been told and assured by INEC that pictures of from EC8A will be taken by the beavers and uploaded to the IRF. And any picture uploaded by the beavers will go in PDF form. But a close scrutiny of the IRF shows that some documents, some things are there in JPEG, some is not from EC88, like selfie of some people. So the question now is, was there any other service that was used to upload some document or pictures to the IRF? Because we saw the pictures were taken by technophones, not the beavers this time. So they all raised the issue of election manipulation to a large extent. INEC maybe genuinely had issues, but this information is not in the public domain. We don't know what happened. INEC needs to come out to tell Nigerians what transpired, that the planned, transmission to the area from the polling units failed in terms of the presidential election. Then one of the prominent things again was the neutrality and impartiality of security agencies. It was observed, in fact, some observer groups have also published their reports, that some of these electoral malpractices took place in the presence of security agencies. In fact, we saw what happened in Adamawa. The illegal declaration was done in the presence of security agencies. Then you now ask, Is the shepherd now becoming a wolf? These are issues that have continued to come up following the general elections. And then INEC had tried to create additional polling units, another issue. But this also did not address the problems intended to be addressed. It was actually intended to, reduce overcrowding in polling units. So we observed a situation where some polling units had less than 10 voters, while others still had as high as 10,000 voters. So you now ask yourself, and this even created a lot of problems on its own because some voters could not access their new polling units. So they were left stranded on the day of the election. Now, when you put all these things together, you find out that, look, the issues that had been raised in the Emery report manifested prominently during the elections. And this now raises the question, if these things were in the public domain, and there were calls for action on the part of security agencies, on the part of political parties, on the part of INEC, on the part of the citizens, why did manipulation take place in some places? Manipulation in this sense does not necessarily mean changing results. No. But actions that affect the general outcome. For example, we saw PVC buyout. We saw vote buying in some places that had been flagged. In fact, during the elections, we saw two basic models of vote buying, what I would call the prepaid and postpaid models. A situation where people got money for vote. This is prepaid. Then a situation where you will vote and bring evidence to be paid. That is postpaid. In fact, the monetary policy of the government that led to the scarcity of the naira was largely touted to be addressed or targeted at vote buying. But it eventually became a tool for vote buying because individuals who would ordinarily not be moved by 10,000 naira became vulnerable and could be moved by 1,000 or 2,000. Similarly, vote buying was now extended to material things, not now cash. We even saw POS devices, machines deployed in some polling units. People were giving fabrics. People were giving things as low as noodles to vote. And these were the various forms of vote buying that we saw. And now you ask, Nigerians know the implications of selling their votes, yet they go ahead doing this. Why? You can say the impact of poverty is high. We have seen instances where persons within this country struggle to feed. Some have various formulas that Nigerians have. A professor was talking, say some have 001, 110, 011, worst case scenario 000. And then you are telling that kind of a human being not to sell votes. It is a matter of survival. It is only the living that can talk of good governance. So people are after survival. So it is like poverty is a tool that the elites have deployed to render Nigerians more vulnerable. So as I wrap up, I will say that, yes, we went into the elections with high hopes, but the procedure, the process was to some extent disappointing to many Nigerians. Not that people didn't know what they were doing was wrong, but because many people have become so vulnerable that they still go ahead to do what they know is wrong. And when we want to get our electoral system well, then we have to look at the remote causes of this thing. We shouldn't be targeting the immediate causes. But if we want to get it right, I think we are still on the right path. Efforts are being made. We need moral reorientation. We need every Nigerian to play his part so that we don't leave it to the security agencies alone. I was speaking at the forum and I said, look, if citizens don't cooperate with security agencies, They are not superhuman beings. They are human beings like we are. If you don't volunteer information, those who snatch ballot boxes, who destroy voting materials, they live among us. And if we don't volunteer information, there is no way security agencies will be able to make a headway. So it is a matter of everybody. It's a collective effort that will, promote our electoral system. Electoral justice is another thing. Elections have come and gone, but how do people get justice? The electoral offenders, are they prosecuted? When they are prosecuted, what is the outcome? Sadly, there are instances where some state governments or government at various levels have a hand in election manipulation, in electoral fraud. And if that is the case, how can the offenders be prosecuted? It becomes sadly a wild goose chase. Again, I have seen in an instance where electoral offenders were being prosecuted and the Attorney General of a particular state went and entered nolle prosequi in favor of those facing trial. So if somebody is standing trial for an electoral offense and the Attorney General, the chief law officer of a state, is entering nolle to stop the proceeding, then you will know that these are state agents that were sent to unleash mayhem on citizens. In conclusion, while I wrap up for now, I would say that yes, we are making efforts. The efforts are characterized by challenges, but they are actually highly surmountable if we put efforts together. Thank you.
Dr. Sam, thank you very much for that wonderful submission. I think you made some very, very insightful points there. And I think the one that really resonates with me is about the consequences for some of the actions that we witnessed. And I think if there are no consequences for these actions, then of course, it sends out the wrong message. And it means that this type of behavior will continue. So thank you for that. And perhaps we'll come back to that if time permits us. I'd like to call on our next speaker, Mojirayo B. Oglano Ekanga, who is a legal practitioner and a principal at MON Legal. I believe that you're going to talk to us a little bit about the role of INEC and some of the observations and some of the legal aspects that maybe people are not familiar with. So the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having me on this call. Yes, and thank you so much, Dr. Sam, for that exposition, because it also lends credence to everything that we are just, we are going to be discussing at this meeting. Now, let's start with the role of INEC. Now, by virtue of the provision of the Constitution, particularly Section 153, INEC was established as the body that coordinates elections. And it was, it is established as an independent body that, that took its own powers even from Section 160 of that same Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the 1999 Constitution, as amended. Now, by virtue of that Constitution, not only undertake and supervise elections, it registers political parties, monitors political campaigns in elections, and then, of course, regulates every aspect of the elections. And so, as that umpire that has this particular power under the 1999 Constitution, by virtue of that Section 160 of that Constitution, it can now decide on its own to produce, or should I say, yes, to make regulations and guidelines for the conduct of that election. And so that is the first role of INEC, actually, because by having that power under Section 160, the Nigerian legislators have delegated to INEC to make a regulation that will guide our elections. And so that particular action itself says that whatever INEC is bringing out as its regulation and guidelines, it means that that particular regulation and guidelines becomes the subsidiary legislation, which has the effect and it has the effect of law. And so it is as valid as possible. And it is, how do I say it? It is mandatory. And compliance to it by INEC itself is mandatory. Now, I've heard even Dr. Wen was talking about there was a lot of high hopes going into the elections. That's true. I'm one of those people who had not had the opportunity ever to vote in Nigeria based on several issues I've had with INEC about registration and locating my PVCs in the past. So this time around, I was able to get my PVC in my hand and I was excited to vote. Why was I excited? As a member of a civil society organization, I had attended different forums where INEC, through its National Commissioner Voter Education, what's his name? The Commissioner, Festus Okoye, had come out and sensitized and spoken to CSOs, spoken to different organizations, letting us know that INEC has enough confidence in the technology that it would be deploying at the elections. Now, we are not bothered because we also knew that INEC deployed this particular technology in Osun, Ekiti, and of course the inception, which was Nasarawa in 2020. And so that boosted our confidence. And of course, INEC also doing us a favor by amending the regulations and guidelines for the conduct of elections of 2010 in 2022 and releasing it on the 3rd of June 2022 gave us so much hope. Because the when you go through this 37-page regulation, you see a lot of beautiful things. And we're not really too particular about the beautiful things that were in that regulation, but we're more focused on that clause 38, which not only did Professor Mahmoud and Festus Okoye really made representation to let us know that this time around, we are complying with the Electoral Act 2022, which provides the foundation for electoral electronic transmission of results. And so when we saw the provisions of clause 38, and clause 38 says that on the completion of all the polling unit voting and result procedures, the presiding officer shall electronically transmit or transfer the result of the polling unit direct to the collation system as prescribed by the commission. And then it goes ahead to say the use of the beavers to upload a scanned copy of the EC8A to the INEC result viewing portal as prescribed by the commission. And then to take the beavers and the original copy of each form's in tamper evident envelope to the registration area or ward collation officer in the company of security agents. Now, we all know that beavers, or for people who do not really understand what this beavers is, it's called the bimodal voter accreditation system. So this machine, as you know, for any layman in Nigeria to have understood, was that this machine will be used to accredit the voter. And when this machine is used to accredit that voter, it will, at the end of the day, the voter will know that, oh yes, I am eligible to vote. Now, when that happens, of course, the law, according to, how do I put it, if you look at sections 41, from section 41 all the way to section 63, I can't begin to explain each of the sections one after the other. So let me just rush through them or just go through it. So I think in 2015, what was obtainable then was a smart card reader that was being used. But now the technological device that INEC had represented to us was the beavers. And so everybody knew that the beavers will be the one will be the machine to authenticate each voter. And so when you are the polling unit, of course, you are, yes, the INEC officials would verify you, and then of course you move straight to the booth to cast your vote. And then the provision of the law says that at the end of the voting, the presiding officer will then collate all the results, announce the results, and then transmit the results. Now that transmission is that one that was clearly provided under clause 38 of the regulation. But not only that, section 64 of the act itself had stated, and if for not quoting, I don't want to go into a lot of quoting, but I think we should do this. 64A says that the number of accredited voters stated on the collated results, or let me just go back, let me backtrack. 64.4 says a collation officer or returning officer at an election shall collate and announce the result of an election, subject to his or her verification and confirmation that the number of accredited voters stated on the collated results are correct and consistent with the number of accredited voters recorded and transmitted directly, please, emphasis is on transmitted directly from polling units under section 47.2 of the Act. Now let's backtrack to section 47.2, which says that to vote, the presiding officer shall use a smart card reader or any other technological device that may be prescribed by INEC for the accreditation of voters to verify, confirm, or authenticate the particulars of the intending voter in the manner prescribed by the commission. And so everyone, I believe that a lot of people who wanted to vote in this 2023 election were very, very confident that INEC was going to stick with the technological device that it was going to be deploying, and that is the beavers. And so we're all excited, we were all pumped up, and then we were all looking forward to when we go ahead to vote. We expected that the result of the election in over 176,000 polling units will be uploaded directly from the polling units as provided for not only by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but by the Electoral Act 2022 and the regulation and guideline that was made, produced specifically for the 2022 elections. And so when doctor was talking, he said so many things, that there were things about JPG and so many faulty uploads on the IRF. Yes, the IRF, now the result viewing portal. So the way the law has established it and the way INEC has explained over time, and I'm talking of INEC has been explaining and giving several representations since 2022, even up to November 16, 2022, when the Professor Yakubu Mahmoud was saying categorically that we would deploy beavers and we will use IREV, and we will ensure that all your results are collated electronically. That was what was said. Not only is he saying this, the law also provides this. The regulation also states that the collation will be happening, and simultaneously Nigerians can actually can actually register on the IREV and be, following the collation, be following the upload of each and of these results. And that was what everybody expected. But at some point during the elections, we started hearing different complaints from different, news agencies bringing up, and uploads, especially for people who were on Twitter. We see things like the presiding officers were complaining that to transmit the results on BVAS, it was not going. And interestingly, it was only the presidential election that was having these issues on BVAS, because a lot of the results for the National Assembly, the House of Rep and the Senate were uploaded through the same process. But we were now noticing that out of 176,000 thereabouts polling units, at the end of at the end of the elections, we're seeing that just about 37,000 results were uploaded on the IREV. And in fact, there were a lot of issues that were involving, non-uploading of that of the result as promised by INEC, as guaranteed by the regulation of INEC itself, guaranteed by the chairman of INEC himself, and guaranteed not only by the Electoral Act, but also by the regulation that INEC itself presented to the general public, that guaranteeing us that everything will be accordingly according to the rule of law and due process. And so the question for a lot of people then was, okay, if this was the case, and people started raising issues while the collation of results was going on, why did the INEC and its officials continued regardless to upload, to collect results, even especially the ones that were being objected to? Of course, we saw a lot of things happening. For people who were watching live,
Mm-hmm.
we were seeing aides such as yes, the former House of Rep member Dino Melaye, who was
Mm-hmm.
that's I think is the PDP agent,
Yes.
who came up and continued to say, oh no, this process is not right. This is against your act. This is against section 60 of the Electoral Act, and that was what we saw, and that was the reality for so many of us for that election, especially the presidential elections. And so the question now for us to now really determine is this: as INEC discharged its role, as INEC discharged its function as provided under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, if at the time that the elections were that the results were being collated, results were not collated through the beavers as expected, the results were not collated as when it was supposed to be collated, even there were guidelines as to time. I think every election should have ended at 2:30, but I knew somebody who was still at a polling unit at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, the Electoral Act had provided under is it section 60 or 41 thereabouts, that once there are issues concerning a particular polling unit, especially when you are uploading or you are collating results, and if there are issues, that INEC itself can actually cancel everything in that particular polling unit. And we didn't see all this happening. Rather, we saw that INEC went ahead to collate, declare the winner in the middle of the night. Not only did he declare the winner in the middle of the night, they still went ahead to issue the certificates to both the declared winner and the vice. And so where we'll be going forward from there, is it that there are no consequences for these actions? So I'll leave it to the next speaker. Then we will pick it up from there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mujirai. I think what I can really sort of say about that is that the violations that you highlighted is really sort of, talking and speaking to the credibility of the process and therefore the election itself. And perhaps that's something that we'll delve deeper into later. And I'm sure that, people have questions around that. Let's move on quickly, and let's now bring in Gloria Mbayem Balasin, who is a principal partner of My Legals. Gloria, I believe you will be talking to us about
Okay. I don't know if you hear me, but I just noticed you stopped talking because I can't hear you.
yeah,
But
apologies.
anyway,
I'm
good
not
evening.
quite sure my mic just kind of stopped working, but I can hear you fine. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Much. Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think it's a worthy moment to take up from where my sister Mojirayo left off. And that is with specific reference to the violation of trust of the electorate in Nigeria. And Moji asked a fundamental question: what is the duty of INEC, that is the Independent National Electoral Commission? And to summarize it, it's to do two things: to count votes and to account for those votes. And on those two scores, we see that INEC failed woefully. When you give somebody a duty and they fail to perform it, the question will then be, should you not demand for accountability? If we have given 355 billion naira to INEC to conduct elections, and they didn't conduct the elections and they didn't deliver on their constitutional mandate, and also failed to comply with their own rules, should we now move ahead like the way we seem to be doing now? Because there seemed to be this whole conversation that has shifted from the 2023 elections to 2027, when there are still pending issues. The manner in which we have been practicing our democracy is worrisome. Because you see, in a democracy, it should be the people that should decide who should lead them. But we now see a kind of democracy where the powers of the people uh, has, with due respect, been usurped by the courts. That you now have court designed democracy, which has really been problematic. And we see that with what happened with the Imo elections, where Uzodima, who came fourth, was declared governor over Emeka Ihedioha, who came first in the elections and who clearly was the people's choice. But you see, those kind of things will happen if we don't demand that the institutions that should do their work, and when they fail to do the work, are not made to redo the work or indeed account for it. So the court doesn't have the mechanism to count votes. The court certainly doesn't have the mechanism to account for votes. In other climes, what happens is that when there is contention in election results, they bring the statisticians, they bring the mathematicians to collate those votes, because they are the ones who have the expertise to be able to do that. In our own courts, we don't have that expertise. And of course, that reflects with the kind of judgment that we have had in recent times. So in terms of who should be asking the question now, in terms of the postmortem of the 2023 elections, I think fundamentally the Nigerian citizens need to keep the conversation still going, to say, look, what we voted for is not the result that we have. In a manner of speaking, what we ordered for is not what was delivered to us. And that should continue to be something that should happen. But we now see that the conversation is shifting from
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, I see Dr. Sam.
Yes, I can hear you clearly, but I think she has
Right.
network challenges.
Yeah, it appears that we've lost Gloria. So what we'll do is let's move on to, if we have Mr. Joseph Ote here, I'd like to move on to Mr. Joseph. Mr. Joseph is a renowned lawyer, familiar face, I'm sure, to many of you. He's also a civil rights activist and a convener and access to justice at A2 Justice. Welcome to the conversation, sir. It's a pleasure to have you today. I believe that you're going to be talking to us again around this sort of theme about finding justice. We're particularly keen to hear your views on this. And without further ado, I'd hand it over to you to talk to us and provide your submission.
All right. Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. So what I'll basically do, I hope that this is not this does not disrupt Gloria's conversations. Hopefully, at some point, she will be given the opportunity to complete. But what I what I thought I should contribute to this is just to discuss issues around now that the aggrieved parties have gone to court to um, challenge the manner the elections were conducted. What are the what are the sorts of prospects that we have uh, that gives us some indication that electoral choices made by voters will be um, validated, somehow will be ascertained, properly ascertained, and then validated. Some kind of how can we be sure that the courts will be able to salvage democracy in Nigeria and repair the brutal and pervasive disenfranchisement of voting rights that have occurred. I think generally a lot, generally most people know that um, significant levels of fraud attended the conduct of the last elections. So as we then move to the corridors of the courts themselves, what hopes do we have that our judicial system is able to correct the perversions that have occurred and then enliven our hopes um, for continued democracy in Nigeria, you know. And I think there is some understanding, that for a lot of Nigerians are just down. The courts, just represent the only hope that people have now. They are just our last line of hope, defense, whether or not these hopes are well placed or not. But there are still people who are waiting to see whether the judiciary can, restore their belief that democracy can succeed in Nigeria, you know. And so this places quite a very heavy burden on the courts, and if the courts are not able to, provide the kinds of interventions that will inspire hope in the judiciary, the rule of law, constitutional democracy, then that would be a very difficult moment for Nigerians. And no one is probably able to predict what the consequences will be. But at least we know that in countries where, people felt frustrated, people felt hopeless about the elections that have happened in many of those countries, but also in Africa, it has led to very violent political conflicts, and displacements of hundreds of thousands of people. So the prognosis, if the judiciary does not live up to expectation, is not that very good. In 2007, you saw what happened in Kenya. I think about 1,000 people lost their lives as a result of the violence that attended the elections in Kenya, which also contributed in Kenya's efforts to completely overhaul their constitution and their judicial system. In fact, in Kenya, some of you might remember in Kenya, the anecdote used to be that, look, why go hire a lawyer when you can pay the judge. Things were really that bad in Kenya. And then, of course, these same things happened in Cote d'Ivoire in 2010. So there's a lot at stake. There's a lot that's hanging on the judiciary, and it really will be in the interest of Nigeria for the judiciary to step up to the plate, and give people that sense of community, that sense of this is a project that is achievable, that sense of nationhood, that sense of citizenship. So there's a lot at stake, and I really hope that um, you know at the end of the day there will be light at the end of the tunnel, and people will feel that their hopes are not completely lost. But there's this question about whether we are even entitled to exercise that concern about the effectiveness and performance of our courts in redressing the fraud that has been perpetrated, by a host of political actors. And this question is probably more relevant in Nigeria because, this question resonates, particularly in Nigeria, because in many other countries, when the conversation is about elections and the performance of the electoral body and, the problems with electoral fraud, you hardly get courts being dragged into that mix, into those kinds of conversations, because there is an assumption that in spite of whatever happens within the political, atmosphere, within the political process, that there is at the very, behind all of this, the courts are still dependable instruments for remedying any electoral, problems that may have arisen. In other words, it's not in every jurisdiction you have concerns about the judiciary. It's not in many countries that the judiciary, there are questions about the capacity, the ability, and the willingness of the judiciary to sustain constitutional democracy. But unfortunately, that's the kind of narrative you actually find when you go through a lot of the literature in Nigeria. A lot of people are now beginning to question whether the courts can be trusted. A lot of people are beginning to wonder whether there is actually any use going to the courts. And a lot of people are actually telling the courts, look, you only have one option in this matter, do this, call the elections as they were, call the results as they were and nothing else, So all of this gives Nigeria, gives Nigeria a very unique coloring when it comes to questions about remedying political or electoral injustices. Well, I think Nigerians are entitled to exercise that kind of caution for many reasons. Part of these reasons is the judiciary's own very poor records in being able to overturn results that were manifestly unreliable, incorrect, and perverted. The statistics don't bode very well for Nigerian courts. A study I stumbled upon, although it's a dated one, actually showed that Nigerian courts have overturned election results in less than 7% of the time since 1999. You know, in spite of all the problems that Nigeria had with those elections.
Mhm.
And of course, you know, everyone knows that when it comes to presidential elections, there's been no precedent at all of the court overturning presidential elections in spite of the levels of fraud that have been associated with those elections in time past. In fact, some of those who benefited from that, you know, those flawed electoral processes, like President Yaradua, actually came up later to, you know, admit that everything was not okay with the elections that produced him.
Mhm.
You know, can you all hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just wanted to check in on that. Now, Nigerians are also concerned because of the judiciary's own record of, um, how do I put this now? Because of the own judiciary's own record of corruption. You know, between 2003 and now, at least 15 judges or justices of the higher courts have been investigated, have been found guilty, have been prosecuted, you know, for electoral related perversions of justice. In other words, let's say for corruption. You know, that's a very disturbing figure for any country. And I'm not talking about, you know, the wider record of corruption. I'm talking about cases related to election petitions and allegations that judges were bribed. In fact, not just allegations, many of these allegations were substantiated by the judiciary's National Judicial Council. That's a very terrible record. On top of this, Nigerians are concerned because the judiciary of late has actually begun to recall many of the judges that it sanctioned for corruption, giving the impression that the judiciary is not taking issues about judicial integrity as seriously as it ought to. Now, people are going to be asking, you know, how can you place trust in a judiciary that's, you know, recalling judges who have been convicted or found liable for corruption, clearly by the judicial authorities? You know, how do you place trust in that kind of institution? Um, and again, of course, if you recall that the ICPC did some studies about, you know, released the study of a survey not too long ago, you know, just confirming that, saying that during electoral cycles, I think it looked at a period of 3 years, that about 9 billion naira was passed on to judicial officers, as bribes. 9 billion naira. That's the ICPC speaking, and the judiciary did not, as far as I know, reject, deny, disclaim that report. You know, so it's really an unfortunate situation we are in. I don't think the judiciary has done very much to rebuild that confidence that has been systematically eaten up by judges, by the judiciary itself. You know, not too long ago, there were issues about the head of the judiciary traveling and meeting someone here and there. And, you know, quite apart from the veracity of those allegations, but at the very least, You expected a judiciary that was interested in jealously guarding its integrity, to provide the public with better information about that event, supplying evidence to show, to deny that that couldn't have been the case, that what people feared couldn't possibly have been the case. Now, I didn't see that level of denial, you know. I didn't see the judiciary feeling particularly stigmatized, embarrassed by those sorts of allegations. And that's something that should bother all of us, because you expect that a country's judiciary, with the sorts of people who are involved, would, would do everything in its power uh, to assure the public that it has the integrity that it ought to have, or at least that it's supposed to have. So these are all some of the problems, some of the challenges that affects the way people think about what prospects they have with the matters, these election matters, going to the courts. I think I'll probably just stop here. Are there any prospects that we can find justice? Again, people are very worried. They look at how the Supreme Court has performed very recently in cases from some senators, Senator Lawan and Senator Akpabio, people who did not contest party primaries for their positions, and who are, the courts effectively let take those tickets for those offices and then eventually get elected. So these things trouble people a great deal. But so that's the problem. We think that the Supreme Court is extremely legalistic, but I'll leave that and hopefully see whether we can expand on that in subsequent conversations.
Yes, I mean, thank you, Mr. Joseph. I think your observations, they were quite sort of, for me, I take a long, deep breath with some of those observations that you've made. And I think the narrative it paints doesn't necessarily fill the average Nigerian who's hoping for justice, fairness, and free and open processes. It wouldn't necessarily fill you with much confidence when you listen to this sort of observation that you've made. And there are going to be questions where, hopefully you'll be able to shed a bit more light on some of your thoughts around what we may experience in this upcoming process. So we've now come to the part of the discussion where we have tailored questions for our guest speakers. I'm going to be calling on Dr. Samuel, first of all, Dr. Samuel Guche. I'm going to ask you 4 questions, Dr. Samuel. You'll have a couple of minutes to answer each question and each round of 2. Our 4 speakers will be, I'll be giving you tailored questions for all of you, starting with Dr. Samuel. First question for Dr. Samuel is, the IREV was established to improve the integrity of Nigeria's electoral process. In your opinion, how effective has this initiative been in achieving its goals? What areas do you think need further improvement? Was there actually a technical glitch in the BVAS or IREV portal, or was it a human element? If it was a glitch, should the election have been postponed as a result of the glitch? So that is the first question. Dr. Samuel, if you bear with me, I'm going to ask you all 4. So please, perhaps you can note some of these questions down, and then because in the interest of time, I'm going to run through them, and then you can just respond as you wish. So the second question is, what is the failure to upload the IREV portal, and thus
Can I
failure? just bear with me. If I could just ask you a couple more, and then I'll hand over to you, and the floor will be yours to respond as you wish. So let me repeat the second question again. What does the failure to upload the IRF portal, and thus a failure of the authentication of the manual results, thereby as a mandatory prerequisite for the validity of the elections, mean in respect of the declaration by the INEC chairman? 3, the bimodal voter accreditation system was introduced to address the challenges of voter identification and the authenticity of the ballot during the elections. What are your thoughts on the implementation of this system during the last presidential election, and what recommendations would you make for its improvement in future elections? The fourth and final question is INEC solely responsible for the crisis of confidence in the electoral process? I know I've asked you a lot of questions there, Dr. Sam, but hopefully you got the gist of those questions. Feel free to ask clarification if you wish, but you now have some time to respond to those questions before we move on to our next speaker.
Thank you very much. I had the third, fourth questions.
Okay, would you like me to repeat them?
And crisis of confidence. So the first one was on IREV, right?
Yeah, so the first question was on IREF. Yeah, IREF. You know, if there was a glitch. Yes, I can hear you. So the first one was on IREF, and it's saying that, you know, was there a human element essentially? And if there was a glitch, should the election have been postponed as a result of the glitch? Dr. Sam, you still there? Okay, it appears that
yes, I was saying I had the third and second questions, please, before I respond.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? Dr. Sam?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question was about IREF. Okay.
Okay.
And essentially, if I can try to summarize it, it's asking that was there a technical glitch in the BVAS or IREF portal, or was it a human element? And if there was a glitch, should the election have been postponed as a result of that glitch? So that was the first question.
Okay. Second one.
And the second one was, what does the failure to upload to the IREF portal, and thus the failure of the authentication of the manual results, thereby as a mandatory prerequisite for the validity of the elections, mean in respect of the declaration by the INEC chairman?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. The IREF, as the lady said, Mojirayo said earlier, when there is a law, a principal legislation, giving powers of regulation making to a body, it is subsidiary legislation. It means the legislature is delegating its law-making powers to a body, which was actually done in this case. So the regulations made by, unfortunately, INEC in one breath is in court arguing in favor of the IREV in Osun election. And in this case, so it's like blowing hot and cold at the same time, which does not work well in any system. That technical glitch that INEC told Nigerians about, it could be as a result of a human error. And that's why we are saying, where is the responsibility? Who is culpable? Are we going to watch and let this be? Because billions were put into this. And if it did not yield the desired results, then of what use? Who is responsible? We cannot continue to impoverish ourselves as Nigerians by spending money on white elephant projects. A lot of funds went into this and it did not work. Who is responsible? Is it the developer? Is it an officer? Who? We have not been told. And that's why I'm saying information management is central. You can't just say we take responsibility without telling us what actually happened. So, of course, it is only INEC that can come out to tell Nigerians. Because as I said earlier, we saw situations where, you know, the regulations scanned copy. But we saw JPEG pictures taken by other devices apart from the beavers. Could it be that the security of the system was compromised? These are questions that we cannot answer unless INEC comes out to tell Nigerians what actually happened. We know for sure that it is a milestone by the election management body. But if there is a failure, I can tell you that if Nigerians are adequately informed as to what transpired, then we'll be talking from a perspective of knowledge. But as it is now, it was a failure, and that is it. So we will not know now whether it was a human error or a technical glitch. If it's a technical glitch, you did a test run of this before the election. How come? They say because of the volume of the result they use, that is why the thing had issue. But it was okay on the side of the National Assembly election. And what was going to National Assembly portal was more, because we had for the House of Reps and the Senate. That was more than the presidential election. Why did this one have problem? We should know as Nigerians. And as it is, Yaga Africa deployed over 3,000 stationary observers. They also the organization also deployed 822 mobile observers across over 1,507 or so polling units, sampled polling units. Issues were discovered, inconsistencies, especially in Imo and Rivers. Now, were within the same range anyway, but this has not been explained. The IREP did not serve the purpose it was meant for. So, of course, Nigerians are within their rights to challenge the integrity of these elections, because what they saw was not what they were promised. That is that on the part of IREP. Then, failure to upload results. I think I partly answered that one when I talked about the first one. It is a regulation that is, in fact, in this case, INEC failed to meet the standard it set for itself. And you see, I had my cousin participated in the election, and his motivation was that results will be transmitted real time from polling units. So failure to upload this actually diminished the trust Nigerians have or had in the entire process. And you can say that, look, what happened? That also takes us to the issue of assignment or apportionment of responsibility and culpability. Until people begin to face the consequences of their actions. You know, in law, we have theories of punishment. Deterrence is one. Somebody does something, he goes free. It becomes a motivation for another person to do it because he knows nothing will happen. Are we going to watch and say we had issues, elections have come and gone, and then that is it? What happened to the billions we spent? What happened to future of election? What happened to the falling trust in the electoral process? What happened to the integrity, the neutrality and independence of INEC? What happened to the carrot and the stick? There are officers who have worked creditably well. What is their reward? Those who have sabotaged the system, because we saw that in the subsequent elections, some people, especially ad hoc staff and others, were dropped. Does it end there? Can we punish security agencies? How can you tell us that the Sokoto rep, the Adamawa rep that was suspended, is nowhere to be found? He has become wind now, invisible. No. So you can see that there are elements of complicity. That's why I mentioned earlier that security agencies cannot be excused, because there have been cases of intimidation of voters, even in the press. In fact, it has been reported from various quarters that sometimes they even partake in sharing money brought to certain polling units. So it is time now to start placing responsibility and culpability where it rightly belongs. Then, beavers. Of course, as I said earlier, when you look at the outcome of the elections, people are saying, oh, low turnout, low turnout. But you can attribute it to the impact of technology, because you have to be accredited now by the beavers, either through fingerprint or facial recognition. So the era of, bringing out high numbers is gone. Now, there could be other forms of malpractices, but we are actually on the right path. We must give credit to INEC. It started, as the Learned Council said, in 2015, when we had issues of card reader that had no legal framework. But now we have a system. When you even argue against election technology, we'll now go to history, because these are means of interpretation. When the courts want to interpret, sometimes they go to history. What is the mischief that this particular provision is intended to address? Under this circumstance, we had a situation where smart card reader had no legal framework. We have now created a legal framework for technology, and we are saying it is not mandatory. It is mandatory. It is mandatory. And as you can see it, well, there are room for improvement. During the mock accreditation and beavers testing, we had issues of recognition of people, the old people, maybe because of their changing features also, and a few recorded during the election. But on the whole, the beavers functioned optimally. So it is reliable. As it is, I think it is a tool that we can continue to improve and deploy. There's room for improvement. A few challenges encountered were fixed. In some cases, beavers replaced. But on the whole, it was a beautiful technology that was brought on board for the purpose of electoral integrity in Nigeria. Then finally, crisis of confidence. I think this one was created by the election management body. So, because Nigerians had a lot of confidence, especially with this technological innovation. But now, when you fail to do what you told Nigerians that you would do, then the issue of crisis of confidence will start setting in. Again, when the same you start arguing that it is not mandatory, then people will now say, can we trust you? You did not do what you said you would do. And then instead of explaining why it was impossible to do it, you are now arguing that it is discretionary. Then it shows that, look, we might not be able to trust you. So I think it all goes to the issue of information management and how the INEC relates with the public. If there's an issue, tell Nigerians. It wasn't the technical error wasn't enough or the technical glitch wasn't enough to have led to postponement. But INEC ought to have put everything in place before the election. And this is what they said they did. What problem was it that could not be fixed within the first few minutes of commencement? So it's a matter of self-inflicted injury, that you built a reputation for yourself before the election, but you damaged it by your conduct at the end of the day. So I place it at the doorstep of INEC strictly, because you control the system, you control the beavers, control the IREP, and then under you and your control, the IREP did not work, and the same you are giving a contrary explanation and arguing to the contrary. I think it is now time for INEC to retrace its steps, continue to build confidence in the people, so that Nigerians can have more hope in the dividends of democracy. There are many people who came out this time around because they felt that their votes will count. But at the end of the day, it is a massive feeling of disappointment. Who created it? It is still INEC. Whether it was by ad hoc staff or tenure staff, it is still INEC. So I think INEC should take full responsibility and come out to tell Nigerians what happened and continue to build confidence in the system again. I think that would be my response to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sam. And moving swiftly on to Mujirayo. Again, 4 questions for you. I apologize for stacking them like this, but I'm just trying to get as many questions in the time permitted. So the first question is, there have been several distractions from different quarters, especially statements by people meant to be elder statesmen. What are the recondite issues before the tribunal in this selection? And what specific provisions of the Electoral Act do you believe INEC violated during the last election? And what impact did these violations have on the outcome of the election? That is the first question. The second question, in view of the breach of results in the form of EC8A and the IREF portal, can you address the nature of the electoral offences committed, the culprits, and the consequences? That is the second question. Third question, with reference to the Adamawa resident electoral commissioner's actions, can you draw a comparative analysis between the action of the REC and that of the chairman, and what steps do you think INEC needs to take to improve its internal processes and ensure its officials are held accountable in an automated manner for any violations or infractions of the Electoral Act in future elections? That is the third question. And the fourth and final question, the federal government says President Buhari has delivered on his pledge to leave behind a legacy of free, fair, and credible elections. But many Nigerians disagree. What is the threshold a free, fair, and credible election? And so, apologies, let me repeat that. What is the threshold of a free, fair, and credible election? And did the president meet that expectation? That is the fourth and final question. I'm happy to clarify any of those questions that you want clarification on. So feel free to ask me. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to you now to respond.
Okay, thank you very much, Solomon. Okay, where do I start from? I think I want to just have this kind of format in addressing these questions. So before we talk about the consequences and the nature of the offense, one of the things that we should just ask ourselves is, was there a precise law? Was there a law in place that everyone could understand, every citizen could understand? INEC, the umpire itself, could understand. Political parties could understand. Agents could understand. Presiding officers, polling units, everybody during this election. Yes, there were. One, there was the Constitution. Two, there was the Electoral Act 2022. Three, there was that guideline, regulations and guideline for the conduct of the election in 2022. So we had all this. And interestingly, let's look at one of the offenses under the Electoral Act. Now we have section 122, subsection 1 of the Electoral Act, which says that every person in attendance at a polling unit, including every officer charged with the conduct of an election, and his or assistants, and every polling agent and candidate in attendance at the polling station or at the collation center, as the case may be, shall maintain and aid in maintaining the secrecy of the voting. And so, by virtue of that, any person acting contrary to the provisions of that particular section commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a maximum fine of 100,000 naira or imprisonment for a term of 3 months or both. Now, what did we see on that particular day of election? The president of Nigeria, Major General Muhammadu Buhari, voted in his Daura. After voting, he publicly displayed his ballot paper to show the world the candidate of his choice. And so, to make it even more interesting, the Attorney General, the Chief Law Officer of the Federation, also follows suit in his own polling unit and displays for everybody that this is the candidate that he voted for. Now, tell me, these two major people, both the president and his advisor in chief, they violated section 122 of the Electoral Act. Now, who calls them to order? Nobody. People mentioned it. People went ahead and, said, oh, why is this, but till now, I don't see anybody I don't see any issues being raised. Yes, we can say the president has immunity, but can we say the same thing for the attorney general? Who should know better, by the way? You are the one in custody of all the laws of the federation, and yet you did exactly that, violated the Electoral Act in the presence of all Nigerians. Now, section 65 of the, not 65, 60 subsection 5 of the Electoral Act says that the presiding officer shall transfer the results, including total number of accredited voters and the result of the ballot, in a manner as prescribed by the commission, and that any presiding officer who willfully contravenes any provision of this section commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine not more than 500,000 naira or imprisonment for a term of at least 6 months. So we have all this. We have them. You'll see in the Electoral Act, punishments stated. And of course, that's supposed to like boost our ego, boost our confidence that, oh, INEC knows what they're doing. Even the legislators, they knew what they were doing when they were providing this law, But let's look at the nature of these contraventions that I've just mentioned, Who are the violators? We have several provisions on offenses when you say that, oh, there shall not be vote buying, you should not be found with somebody's PVC, you must not at the polling units be campaigning. We had all these offenses. And interestingly, Nigerians comported themselves throughout the elections because they were hopeful, because they were looking at the INEC and they were looking at the process, that this process is electronically coordinated and it will generate how do I say it showed, there was sort of like a integrity that was following this whole process. And then when you look at the nature of the offenses that happened on that particular day, you will see that it was from the end of INEC itself or the security agents that should be guiding the polling units and the presiding officers. So what is the nature? The nature is that INEC itself contravenes its own law. It contravenes its own regulations. It contravenes even the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999. Unless they are not admitting to this. But this is what was happening. If we had seen clause 38 saying that there should be the uploading, that's the transmission of results, immediately from the polling units, of each polling units all over the federation, then that didn't happen. And there was a claim that this was due to particular glitches and all, and then there were so many excuses that were given at that day, because I'm calling it excuses, and please let it be underlined. Excuses, because INEC had, okay, let's just be nice. Let's just say that INEC had like a year and had with it 355 billion naira to give an election that can be seen to be credible, to be free, and to be fair. And that didn't happen. And so it is because some of these issues are placed before the courts. I would not be able to go into the in-depth analysis because it's sub judice, really. So it's now left for the courts and the processes before it, all the the documents before it, for the court to now decide that as INEC itself maintained the integrity of that election itself, did INEC provide an environment, an atmosphere, the right circumstance and tools for everyone within that particular within the electoral environment? Did INEC provide the exact tools, the right condition for the what do you call it? For for abiding by the provisions of the act, for abiding by the law, for abiding by its own regulation? So those are the issues that I myself cannot answer, because I will look at the question of, for instance, the form EC8A. It was supposed to be, the beavers was supposed to capture this form EC8A and immediately transmit it to the IREV portal, and it was not done. And if it was not done, doesn't it mean that the presiding officer had violated this particular regulation? Doesn't that mean, because if the law is saying that the presiding officer is bound to carry out every function in the manner that is prescribed by the commission itself, then by contravening it, what has happened? Why are presiding officers, why are they not even before the court of law, for instance? Because of course we are not going to find them immediately. We are going to bring them before the court of law, for in all these polling units. Why are they not before the court of law to defend themselves, so that they will not be charged for they will not be punished for or liable to pay 500,000 naira or to go to imprisonment for 6 months? They should present their defenses before the court, because if INEC itself is not coming out to tell us what happened, then all these presiding officers should be charged to court. But who will charge them to court? That will now be the question. Who is going to take these people to court? Because you are telling the executive to check the executive. So you see, there's a problem, because the executive will not be willing, the executive arm of government will not be willing to check itself. And apart from this, anyone who has done a lot of cases when it comes to fundamental human rights before the Nigerian courts or before the regional courts, we know one simple thing, and that simple thing is that there's a lot of impunity when it comes to government, with the government of Nigeria abiding by its own rules, or how do I put it, or by allowing itself to be accountable to the people of the country. I can cite examples. There have been several cases and several judgments against the Federal Republic of Nigeria up till today, and those judgments were not if there were judgment sums, they were not paid. E.g., Dorothy Njemanze against the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's one case that was taken to the ECOWAS court, judgment gotten. Till date, has the compensation been paid? No. So we have plethora of cases where we know that when we are addressing the nature of the electoral offenses and we are talking about the consequences won't be that we are going to be able to hold the government like this, have a good grasp of the government of Nigeria. The consequences will now be on the electorate, the people who gave their hearts, who were so how do I put it, who were so motivated and inspired and said, oh yes, we have the beavers, we have the IREV, let us go ahead and vote, let us go ahead and partake in the elections. And that is where the consequences will be. Those people are the ones that are losing faith, because there is no transparency, there is no accountability. You cannot say for sure that the election was free, fair, and credible.
Well, Jerry, on that point, because I think this is a really important point that we've now come to, and this is where I really want you to kind of maybe let's just round up your segment on this point. What does that free, fair, and transparent and credible process, what does that really look like? Because I think that's where they want to be able to distinguish between what was observed and I guess what everybody's passionate about, which is this idea of a free and fair and credible process. So Can you just give us an indication in your, estimation of what that looks like?
Okay, so let me say this. Before the Electoral Act 2022 was passed into law, there was this Electoral Act 2010. And so under that Electoral Act, as we all know, there wasn't anything called technological device and transmission of results. Now, myself and one of the other, may God bless his soul, Ariyo Atoye, he was one of the people who was at the forefront, fighting for the passage of this Electoral Act. I was with him. We were all there, picketing, lobbying in front of the National Assembly. Not only that, we met with INEC, had conversations with INEC, everything just for the passage of this Electoral Act. And we told them, we said, when this Electoral Act is passed, what we Nigerians want to see is transparency. And for us to see transparency, INEC was going to bring out a regulation. And when INEC brings out this regulation, it would abide by this regulation. And by this regulation, it says that you should transmit election results electronically. Now, you did that when it came to the National Assembly results, and you did it immediately. And people could, on real time, people could follow and say, okay, oh, this person has gone in. Oh, yes, people were following. Then when it came to the what they call it, the presidential one, it wasn't happening. So where is the fairness there? There wasn't fairness. Now there was inequality. There was no part of that which showed that there was a balance of, how do I put it, a balance of rights. Because all of a sudden you are telling me that the results for the House of Rep and the Senate could go in through the beavers, but funny enough, the one for the presidential could not go in. And then to make the matters worse, although we know that the regulation also provided, yes, in clause 48, that immediately the results are being collated. When you're collating it, you are writing it manually and capturing it with beavers, and beavers is taking it in. And there's one thing that the regulation does. The regulation says if there are any discrepancies in respect of the results, the electronically transmitted results will now take priority, will not be the one that will be used to confirm whatever has been written on paper. Now tell me, when the results were coming out, people didn't believe that there was fairness, in the sense that people were seeing some strange results. They were seeing some altered EC8A forms. They were seeing strange things on the IREV. In fact, there were allegations that the result of Alimosho, that's an example, was given for Nasarawa. And so there were all this mix up. So there was no credibility. And credibility is talking about honesty. Credibility is talking about integrity. Is talking about you say that A is going to happen, and then you do A. You say that you are going to Sokoto, and in the next 24 hours, when they are looking for you, they found you in Sokoto. That is credibility. Not that you say that you are on your way to Sokoto, and the next time they are 24 hours, they find you in Lagos. So there is already a contradiction that you are now liable as the person who made that representation to now, to explain. You need to explain what went wrong. Why didn't they find you where you said you were going to? So there was an issue of credibility. There was an issue where there was no fairness. Why wasn't a process that was explained to every Nigerian, a process that was backed by regulation and guideline, why wasn't it followed to the latter, to the nearest full stop?
So,
and then when you talk about freedom, please, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Freedom. You add situations even where the beavers, they were, a lot of people could not even get accredited at the end of the day. and you had a situation where people were forced to stay. I told you, I just mentioned today that somebody waited till 2 a.m. I was chatting with her, and she's a radio presenter. I know her very, very well. She was still chatting. This Nigerian switched on generators and were using torchlights. How many people could stay at that time, at that hour? I knew that when I was still a young lady, maybe before my marriage, I couldn't stay out past 7 p.m. And so imagine, a lot of people felt that they couldn't get accredited, they were disenfranchised. So there was no, in fact, there was no liberty. The security agents, in some cases, especially when you're talking about the March elections in Lagos, for instance, security, there was no security for some people, for some polling units, and it was all broadcasted. We watched them all. So I'm just saying that if you now want to go to the Adamawa situation, Dr. Sam had mentioned it severally, so I wouldn't delve into it because it just showed exactly the decay, the depth of what we are talking about, that there is a lot that has happened, and we putting the executive in charge of the executive arm of government to check itself, it is not going to work. It is not. So the judiciary, yet again, we put the pressure on the judiciary. They are the ones that will get us out of this quagmire if they really want to do that.
Thank you, Mujirayo. And, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, you're still very much a young lady, even though you try to, trying to convince us you're not. As far as we are concerned, you're still very much a young lady. Look, thank you for those observations. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, we're pressed for time. Gloria, welcome back to the conversation. I'm now going to ask you 4 questions simultaneously, and then give you a chance to respond to those questions. Feel free to stop me if you need any clarification or if you want me to repeat any of these questions. And then once I'm done, you can sort of respond and share your thoughts. So the first question, trust is a big deal. As critical stakeholders in the electoral process and as gatekeepers of the nation, now that the elections are over and they have been adjudged veritably flawed, what should the role of the NASS, media, civil society organizations, and the international community be in ensuring that the truth is told, justice is served, and trust in the relevant institutions and governance structure maintained? That is the first question. The second question, and to add to this, we have seen government authorities and security agencies take sides with certain parties post-elections, and most recently, the military issuing warnings as regards the inauguration. Though there are petitions in court and the elections were grossly flawed, is this appropriate, is a question? Should institutions of government protect individuals instead of the state and its laws? That is the second question. And there's an addendum to that, which is, what, in your opinion, should the government institutions and security agencies be doing pre, during, and post-elections, especially now? What is their role, and what should their role be? What do they need to do to gain the trust of Nigerians by standing to be counted with the truth? That is the second question. I know it's a bit of a long one, and I'm happy to clarify if you need it. The third question is, what should the citizens do? Are they totally helpless in protecting their mandate? People have talked about peaceful protest, and indeed some political parties did protest at some point. Beyond protests, what can the citizens do, really? Is there a place for the judicial adjudication via the principle of legitimate expectation? In other words, can citizens as a collective, based on the right to vote as provided by the Constitution, seek a remedy in court via the doctrine of legitimate expectation to address their collective legitimate grounds from a failed administrative process orchestrated by INEC? And the fourth and final question, what is the role of the Nigeria Bar Association in this situation? what should it be doing, and is it doing as it should? That is the fourth and final question. Gloria, look, I know that some of those questions are, were obviously quite long, so I'm happy to, as I said, provide clarity or try to summarize, but hopefully you caught the gist of those questions, and over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Many barrels of questions. I'll try to run through them. But I think that the one question that runs through the rest of the question is whether citizens, under the principle of legitimate expectation, can move for accountability so that trust can be restored, justice is served, and so we can continue in our work of building our democracy. And my answer will be yes. I was going to say to Dr. Sam Oguche, because I know that Yaga was one of the institutions that was, used by NEC to assure people that the elections were going to be free and fair. And I think that civil society should come together to say, look, you used us to project to the people that this was going to work. And now that you have failed, you have put our credibility on the line, and we need to retrieve that credibility, and we have to take you to court. You need to explain what happened. And we cannot just stop by explanation alone. Earlier on, before the connection became temperamental, I was saying that people get away with so much in the country because they just feel that that's how the country works. The country works on default. So you hear things about corruption, you hear allegations about INEC receiving money. Even though these are allegations, they need to be investigated, because you would wonder why things would go the way they did. Now, if the elections for the Senate and House of Reps were uploaded, then the expectation should have been the presidential election that was of higher priority and for which the stakes were higher ought to have been the elections that would have been prioritized, but this was not done. And so we need now to ask the question, why was this not done? And who should have done what and who failed to do it? So that's where I think we should begin. Now, the thing around this election and why 2023 elections conversation must continue until we get to the very root of it is that tied to it is the issue of the growth of democracy, the issue of voter apathy, which used to be huge, but prior to the 2023 presidential elections and on the wings of the promises that were made, people then trusted that this was going to be different because they had seen the off-cycle elections. So you're not going to have a lot of Nigerians come out in the next electoral season if they don't see that the violations that took place in the 2023 elections are not addressed. So we still have to address it. And I was saying that people announce, especially those who have won the elections, they say, oh, let's move forward. But the question is, where are we moving forward to? We'll be moving forward to nowhere if we don't address the things that went wrong. And let me just be bold to say that in our own country, there seems to be a cloak of legitimacy that is, won over anybody who is declared as the winner. So you find that even the politicians who say, just announce the elections, just announce it, we will sort it out in court. But you see, that in itself is criminal. If somebody has not won the elections, then that person should not be sworn in. If we take our cue from what happened with the currency redesign case, we saw how it was timeously decided because it was going to have a great impact on the elections. And that was the contention of the judiciary. Now, even more so, before anyone is sworn into any office, we should have of that exalted office. And we need to look at other climes and the threshold with which they hold their leaders accountable. Even for societies that we may look at them as though they are liberal societies, when it comes to the leadership question, it is a huge issue. And everything is squared down to leadership because there is no country can rise above the level of the leadership that it has. And in Nigeria, we constantly make this something that is trivialized.
So we saw also how that in international media, there were conversations around our country having a presidential elect who is drugged, and that's an open secret now. So that also needs to be investigated, because the quality of the person who you put as a leader of a country is very important. Now, you asked a question about security services and how that people feel that they took sides, and whether security institutions should be protecting people and not institutions. Clearly, the answer is that our institutions should be protected. It is, for instance, the Nigerian police force. It is not the police force for private, Nigerian private force. It is the Nigerian police force. And to that extent, there is a need that when our security agents go to carry out their assignments, that those assignments have to be carried out in a manner that is consistent with the law, and where people are found to be under their obligations, that they should be held accountable. Again, in Adamawa, we saw that Hudu Ari was able to do what he did in the full glare of a commissioner of police who was there. And that just tells you the level of impunity that happens, and how that it has become something of a conversation that we'll just talk about it in commentaries and then we move forward. So if we're going to deal with the issues, there needs to be a holistic take of all the issues, and how that every issue needs to be well addressed, and those who should be accountable be held accountable. So the question is, what should citizens be doing now? Are we hopeless? I don't believe the Nigerian citizens are hopeless. But then again, you would have to look at what it is that happened, even with the manner in which the elections were announced. They were announced in the night, because the expectation was that by the morning time, they would have put in security agents around to try to quell any form of resistance that would be seen. In places like Kaduna, for instance, the moment we saw the number of security agents that were put out on the streets, we knew that what the people voted for would not be what the outcome would be. Because if you declare who the people voted for, you would not need that number of security agents to quell anything. And so this now takes us to the issue of what to do to strengthen our institutions. And I know that from the moment that President Barack Obama mentioned that Africa needs strong institutions and not strong leaders, it has become something of a vibe and a rhyme. But the truth is, it is people who make institutions strong. So we also need to begin to look at who are those who occupy the institutions. The judiciary now is faced with the big task of now deflecting what has become the hubris of go to court. And I hope that the joke around it and how that our judiciary now is getting on the mind, unfortunately, by the Nigerian public, would make that institution to sit up and to say, look, the judiciary must indeed save this country. And I have always been of the opinion that as bad as things are, we must have certain institutions that are sacred, where if everything goes wrong, we can all say, no matter how bad it is, we're going to go to this institution and things are going to go right. And one institution that should be that institution is the judiciary. The other one is INEC. For crying out loud, you cannot be an independent National Electoral Commission and not be independent. That indeed is an aberration of what it stands for. And from that point is where we must begin to hold them into account and say, no, INEC is transparent election, what is fair and fair elections, with the expectation that who they voted for will be who will be announced. And let me just say that Nigerians are not interested in process. They are interested in the outcome. They want to be sure that whoever it is that they voted for is who will be announced at the end of the day. Whether you use card readers, whether you use beavers, whether you use IRF, whether you use stones to count it, that's not what is important. What is important is that whoever it is that was voted for is who is accounted for. So the last question, the role of the NBA and what it should be doing. Unfortunately, the NBA kind of shot itself in the foot when the president gave an excellent mark to the INEC even before the elections were announced. I hope that though there will be the honor path that the NDA will take to say that they were wrong, because even INEC scored itself lower than what the NDA gave it. And to that extent, the NDA can then come together, particularly the committee that was set up by the NBA to look into the elections and give us the right report, the kind of report that will command the respect of Nigerians. So on the whole, I would say that it is important that we hold down this conversation and not let it go away. We cannot talk about 2027 without looking at 2023, because the issues are not going to go away. They are going to remain with us until we have the courage to say we need to dissect this.
Gloria, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that wonderful contribution. And let me just move swiftly on again. I'm just conscious of time to bring back Mr. Joseph. I think you've been with us, so I think you'll understand. I'm going to now reel off 4 questions to you. I'm looking at these questions and they seem a bit shorter, thankfully, than the ones I've read out previously. So the first one is, what do you believe are the most significant challenges facing the electoral tribunals in Nigeria, and how can they be overcome to ensure justice is served, especially at this time when it would appear that justice is on trial? That is the first question. The second question, in your view, what specific steps can the international community take to support the efforts of the Nigerian stakeholders to improve the integrity of the judicial process, and what impact can such support have on the future elections and judicial decisions in the country? The third question, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999, bracket as amended, provides that a candidate must obtain at least 2/3 of all the states in the Federation and the FCT. The candidate declared as the president-elect by INEC did not meet this requirement. What does this mean, in your opinion, and what do you expect from the judiciary in this regard? The fourth and final question. Also, can you tell us about your letter to the CJN and why you wrote it? As a fourth and final question. Over to you, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you, Solomon. I hope I doubt that I got everything. The first question was, what are the challenges before? Yeah, can you go through the first question again?
Yeah, so basically, the first question in summary is, what do you believe are the most significant challenges facing electoral tribunals in Nigeria? That's the essence. And, is justice on trial? Is the whole system in Nigeria, is it on trial? Does this process put us in a position where ultimately the confidence that the nation has in this judiciary?
Okay, I got that. Okay, thank you. I think one of the biggest challenges that the electoral tribunals and courts face, as I had mentioned earlier, is the crisis of public confidence. There are there will always be a question in the minds of many Nigerians whether whatever position the tribunals and the courts take, whether that position was arrived at through an impartial, independent process, or whether it was a compromised decision. So the tribunals and courts are operating under a very heavy cloud, dark cloud, as it were, so that they will be laboring to convince Nigerians that whatsoever outcomes they reach are outcomes which have been arrived at with utmost integrity, and that nothing was able to affect the independence, the ethical strength of the process that led to those results. Okay, so that's one. Is justice on trials? Clearly, justice is on. Well, let me not use the word justice. Let me say the Nigerian judicial system is on trial, as I did mention, earlier in these conversations. The Nigerian judicial system is on trial, and they are not operating from a very advantageous position. No. I think the antecedents that have gone before the courts up till this time have been antecedents which have put a lot of question marks on the effectiveness of courts and tribunals as instruments of sustaining the electoral choices that people have made. So yes, electoral judicial resolution system is on trial. Let us hope that there is, I mean, in spite of everything that I have said, there is always a slim chance, that we can encounter something that gives us hope for the future. If you look at some of the decisions given by the Supreme Court, some of the heavily criticized decisions by the Supreme Court, you always see that there is a minority opinion. So sometimes 3 justices take one opinion, take one perspective on a matter, and then you see another 2 say, no, we believe this ought to have been the results from these petitions. And if you recall the last presidential elections, I think that was in 2015 that I believe so. Well, certainly I know that in Yaradua's case, we had a split Supreme Court. And some people said, no, the system was very flawed. Some people said, we can't say very much whether it was flawed because the petitioners were not able to pass the very high evidentiary standards that were set to nullify those elections. So there is, no matter how small that chance is, it's there. And it's possible at some point to believe that though the odds are heavily stacked against against believing very, very much in the outcomes, but there is always a possibility that something new might emerge from that process. What can the international community do to improve integrity? Well, something happened not too long ago. There was a news report that some justices of the Supreme Court were refused visas by a particular country because that country felt that the decisions they had given in one particular case was an attack on democracy. It undermined the democratic process. We need to be very careful how we let things like this happen, because every judiciary must operate independently. And the judiciary, the reason why we fight so much for judicial independence is that no judge should have to look over his or her back to say, what will be the consequence of my taking XYZ position on this matter. So when we begin to get judges being sanctioned because of the rulings they give or decisions they arrive at, that is a bit problematic. Now, it's a bit different when we are discussing, when it's not a question of the autonomy of your individual decision, but that you have compromised that independence in a way that's verifiable. If you have been bribed and you have, it's shown that you were compromised, then, let's have everybody weigh in. Let's have the international community come in. And if they need to do things to those kinds of judges, I am, absolutely all for it. But besides the sanctioning process, I think too that the international community must begin to engage with Nigeria on how to strengthen the electoral dispute resolution process. There are a variety of ways they can do this. Also, there are a variety of frameworks through which this can be done. But I think what is key is that we need to get both the national community, both civil society and international community, we need to get the judiciary to step up its capacity to monitor the conduct of judges, particularly during electoral dispute resolution cycles. A lot of things have happened around, in the past when judges decide election petition cases. A lot of lessons ought to have been learned, but I don't think our judiciary has learned those lessons. If it has, it hasn't shown so very demonstrably, because you really don't see any significant escalation of measures and policies and standards and guidelines that the judiciary has put forward to say, as a result of these experiences of the past, we now think we need to do this. And one of the issues we raised in our representations to the Chief Justice of Nigeria was, look, why don't you open up space for civil society engagements with the judiciary in terms of helping you, providing you with information on high risk or things we have seen that might indicate possibly that there has been some judges they have not or may not be keeping up with their oaths of office or with the code of conduct for judicial officers. The problem the judiciary really has when it comes to fighting corruption is that it does have a set of regulations that are extremely legalistic. They do not, they insist on, if you allege, you must prove. It doesn't provide windows for civil society to get involved, because not everybody is able to tell you, oh, I am so and so person and I found this and I'm ready to prove it. But there are lots of people who might have information they can pass to you. And with that information, you can kickstart a process, put some people under your radar, engage with anti-corruption institutions if you have to, but you don't expect that it's the person who is providing you this information that must necessarily use his resources and time and everything and endanger himself or herself in coming to prove such things. So, that process is insular, it's narrow, it needs to be opened up. The judiciary needs to cast its net as far as sure as it's possible in order to detect delinquent judges, in order to see whether the electoral justice process is being carried out with the level of integrity and dependability and transparency that it ought to proceed with. So these are areas where we can all support the judiciary in reviewing its own framework for ensuring we have an accountable electoral justice system. You talked about what's the situation with the 2/3 of votes, a candidate not getting 2/3 of the votes in the FCT. I will demur on that. I would not engage with that. As you very well know, these are some of the issues that have been taken to the tribunal. So it would likely be sub judice to discuss them in a forum like this. So I will not be stoking the ire of the judiciary by giving my comments on the matter that is before it. Now, later to the CGN, I have also discussed this in bits and pieces. It was basically to tell the CGN that, look, we have approached another cycle of resolutions of election petition cases. Here's what we think that the judiciary needs to do. First of all, basically providing support to the judiciary to strengthen its own framework. One of the issues we raised in that letter was this. Look, the judiciary is probably too complacent with those it has found working to undermine the integrity of the judicial process. Now, at this time, lots of people will be trying to reach the judiciary. You would have politicians trying to reach the judiciary. You will have highly placed government officials trying to reach the judiciary. You would have people going up to the Supreme Court, up to the Chief Justice of Nigeria, trying to find ways of interfering with what the judiciary is doing. Now, again, remember that in the not too distant past, the judiciary actually got enmeshed in a process in Sokoto State and tried itself, the leadership of the judiciary tried itself to interfere with how election petitions tribunals in Sokoto State function. Also, not too long ago, a justice of the Supreme Court came out and said, XYZ politician came to my office to visit with me in order to know, in order to find ways of getting a particular judicial outcome. Now, some of this information we got to know as a result of some events that happened, and the Supreme Court had to talk. You remember the 2016 invasion of judges' houses, and then people began to speak up here and there, and that opened a can of worms. That showed us that things were not all right with the way the judiciary was dealing with subtle attempts to interfere with its own function by the political class. And you see, if we allow this happen, or if we allow this continue to happen, then we are continuing to endanger we are continuing to put at risk public trust in the functions of the courts. Because, who knows what the politicians will discuss with the Supreme Court can of course say, or judges can of course say, well, they came, but we did not give them room, or we did not yield to what they asked for. But that's not the standard for transparency, because members of the public were not there when you had those meetings with those people. Also, it is a criminal offense to attempt to interfere with the bribery of judges, or how do I put this now? Attempt to interfere with the way issues are resolved in courts, with the administration of justice. That's actually how it's called. It's a criminal offense. So don't be quiet. When these things happen, call those people who are trying to do this out. Call them out. Refer those complaints to anti-corruption agencies. Then people will begin to see that you are actually making an effort, a credible effort to be transparent. You are making a credible effort to sustain the trust that the public ought to have in you. But you see, when you are silent, so these are some of the issues we raised with the Chief Justice of Nigeria. But as I speak with you, there's been no response. So I think that's, I don't know whether, I think I have covered those 4 questions that you sent.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. So look, before I round up on this segment, I know that Gloria, you had made a point. I don't think you fully got a chance to fully flesh out. So perhaps I'll come back for a minute for you to just kind of complete that.
Thank you very much, Solomon. One I used to listen to a song back in the day that says, there's a need for a few good men. And I would just say that there's a need for a few good men and women in our country. Whether it's in the judiciary, the SS, the security service, the civil society, we have lost the essence of who we should be. And we need to really go back to the basics to know what is right and what is wrong. Because it seems that the the thought about relativism, the doctrine of relativism has eaten so deep that people have no clarity about right and wrong and consequences anymore. In the US and during the Trump's election and the issues that happened in the Capitol Hill, we saw how Michael Pence, even though he was the vice president of Donald Trump, he stood aloof and he didn't support him. Now, in his book, So Help Me God, he spoke about how that it is the duty of a vice president to be loyal, but that there are also loyalties that are higher than the loyalty to a president. For instance, the loyalty to conscience, to constitution, and to God. And I think that in our country, we need to have that conversation, that there's a need for us to be loyal to our conscience, to our country, and to our God. We also see that happened in Malawi as well. So, and I must say that this is not something that is just found in the gene pool of people who are outside of Nigeria. During the Yaradua era, we saw how Professor Dora Akunyili saved the day. By basic standards, President Yaradua wasn't particularly a bad president. He was well intended, but he was sick. Now, no matter how well intentioned you are, you cannot lead a country of over 250 million people sick. And we saw how Professor Dora Okunyili stepped out and she said, look, this whole thing isn't working. We can't continue like this. And I think that that is the sense in which we need to hold this conversation. And I'm glad that Mr. Joseph Ote is here. Before I became a lawyer, Justice for All had continued to do the work. And I must commend the work that your own generation did. But frankly, this is going to be an intergenerational marathon that is also a
Conversation, yeah.
relay. And those of us who are here, we owe it a duty to take the baton and to run with it. There seem to be this our own generation is not even, nobody thinks that we
Okay, it looks as though Gloria's got network issues. I presume that's just not my side. Mr. Joseph, I can see you. I can still hear you. Okay. And I see Mujirayo as well, but Gloria's screen appears to be frozen, which leads me to conclude that the network issue is on her side. Okay, we've lost her. So I think we've approached the final segment, which is an opportunity for people to pose questions. The show is being streamed on other platforms, and I believe that there may well be some questions coming in from some of those other platforms. Dominic, if you're there, I will call on you now just to check to see if we have any questions that have come in from any of those other platforms. Presumably, if there are no questions, then what I'll do is I'll call on our speakers today to share their final thoughts, for 1 minute to share their final thoughts before we wrap up. So, Dominic, are you there? Okay. I don't think we have Dominic with us. So what we'll do is I'll call on each of you to share your final thoughts in a minute, if you can, and then we'll wrap up. So Mujire, I'll come to you first, and then I'll go to Mr. Joseph.
I guess this is about last words, right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm calling all our speakers to just share their thoughts, their final thoughts for 1 minute.
Okay. I just want to talk as a citizen of Nigeria. If I'm talking as a citizen of Nigeria, not as a lawyer or a human rights person, I would say that I wouldn't even go into another election to participate in the voting process. That is me talking as just every Nigerian. But as somebody who is a promoter of civic space and digital rights, I would say that and encourage every Nigerian out there who, for one reason or the other, felt betrayed and felt disappointed about the elections, that you shouldn't lose hope. That this is just a process. This is the democracy, and sincerely, our democracy started in 1999. Yes, we wish it to be stronger than what it is today, but it is not. And as citizens, our participation really goes a long way to ensuring, to how do I put it, to stamping, to holding on to that democracy as much as we can. And of course, we need as citizens to keep engaging. And I like the fact that opposition candidates in the elections, they've been able to rein in their followers. And so there hasn't been any form of violence, which is very beautiful. And hopefully also when the judiciary takes its, decision, that would also not take place. I believe so. And so as a Nigerian, what I can only say is that don't stop talking about it. Don't stop demanding for accountability. Don't stop demanding for transparency, because that is what keeps our our civic space alive. And we need this civic space alive because without the civic space, there is no democracy. And we need this democracy because we can say that government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is the general that's the general rule though. And but of course, we can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Something has happened. It has hurt our feelings, but we can still do better. And then for INEC should please do not take our silence, do not take our, should I say, our complacency, for granted. Do not take it as an opportunity to, continue to deepen this kind of disregard for the people, because this was a huge disregard for the people of Nigeria, the people who you are supposed to ensure that you give them the opportunity to actually vote for who they want, who they really voted for, and INEC has a lot of work to do. Everybody has said that, and so we are hoping that INEC is taking, a reflection. INEC is doing a reflection and doing an internal um, overhaul of everything that has happened. We know that the BVAS is what we need in this kind of country. We know that the IRF can work, can function, because this is the 21st century. We are living on artificial intelligence. We know that a lot of things can work, especially when you're working with that kind of huge fund that INEC was working with. As a digital rights lawyer, I know what, I can, I've heard a lot of things. I've been in a lot of forums. I've been in a lot of intergovernmental spaces, multi-stakeholder spaces. And I know that with that amount of money, INEC could have delivered and made a very loud, a very loud noise that the whole of Africa would have felt it, that yes, this was possible. And so I'm hoping that in the nearest future, we would have something that we can all celebrate about, rather than the graveyard silence that we experienced after the announcement of the winner of that election. So I think that's basically what I can say, and hoping for the best and for a brighter future, brighter democracy.
Thank you, Mujurayo. And I'm coming to you, Mr. Joseph. There was a question that actually came in for you, Mr. Joseph. I'll try to summarize it. Essentially, the audience member is asking that, do you think the reaction of the international community has led to the sort of, the decrease in the pushback that we were seeing, and the sort of energy behind the pushback and the consciousness of Nigerian citizens? And it's kind of led them to a situation now where they just kind of accepted what's happened, and sort of put it down to, well, look, it is what it is. Do you think that the international community and their reaction has influenced that in any way, is what they're asking? And then sort of perhaps you can share your final thoughts along with that answer.
Okay. All right. Do I have the stage?
Yes, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Final thoughts. Well, maybe I should go with the first question you raised. I don't know the extent to which the reaction of the international community to the elections have affected, the momentum, or how people think about resolving the issues that have arisen. I think that people have, very well decided that they would themselves await the completion of all processes related to the elections, including the judicial process, before they decide what to do. If that is something that comes up for some review. It's also possible that there are people who listen uh, to the voices of international community, but I think Nigerians, given what we have passed through and given what the alternatives entail, are resolved. Nigerians we actually have a very high threshold of pain. Of pain, deception, high thresholds for tolerating the things that we don't like. We do have that kind of threshold. Um, but I'm not saying that it's an inelastic threshold. No, I think that a lot of people are willing to say, rather than spill blood on the streets, let's still give a chance to see whether we can get our votes properly counted through the regular process. What happens after that, I don't know. Okay, so um, let me go to my final thoughts. Um, there is so much we need to do going into the future. I know Gloria had said we shouldn't be talking about the future just yet, but I'm not saying let's ignore the present. I really, like many Nigerians, want the present to be resolved in a way that meets the expectations of all Nigerians. Now, part of why we have the problems, the anxieties we have about the judicial process is because the electoral laws the Electoral Act actually encourages the brigandage that we see. It encourages the malpractices that we see. It encourages the sabotaging of the elections as we have witnessed. And you probably will ask me how. Why does it do so? It does so because it itself places a very high bar uh, for overturning the results of any elections that have taken place. So the Electoral Act says something like, no elections shall be overturned except that there is, the non-compliance with the provisions of the Electoral Act are substantial, and that the results of those elections will be, the results would not have been tainted. In other words, let me paraphrase this. If a petitioner cannot show that the results of emerging from those flawed electoral processes would otherwise be different, or the outcomes would otherwise be different. And also, if the petitioner cannot show that the irregularities that were complained about, or the practices that were complained about, were considerably, substantially, were very substantial, then the courts cannot overturn an election. So that's the standard that the Electoral Act has placed. That's also the standard that the Nigerian election courts and tribunals are following, are deciding. But there's so much wrong with that standard, because there are many elements in that standard that you just can't prove. For example, how do you prove that the threat of violence to people who will be voting in any particular area has tangibly affected the voting in that area, or has dissuaded people who otherwise wanted to vote from coming to vote. That's very hard to prove. That's a very high bar that is very difficult for petitioners to cross. Secondly, how do you, so just to save time, what you see is that a lot of people whose business has been to rig elections, they don't see anything that makes it costly for them to perpetrate those electoral frauds. In other words, so what the law basically tells them to do is do this as much as you can. It's only in very limited cases that you can that what you have done, the fraud that you have committed, will be discountenanced. So the likelihood is that we are better off. We gain an advantage where we have a better leverage than the other parties if we do this. It's not likely to result in any punishment for us. But the question, the big question there is, why should we allow people who have profited from election malpractices, from election rigging, from fraud? Why should we allow them profit from these things by making it very impossible for you to show that the rigging things were very substantial, or were substantial enough to change the outcomes of those elections? So if we use that template, we're likely to continue to run into problems like this. But if we change that formula, if we ensure that if we say, for example, that if rigging occurs and it occurs with the kinds of intensity that we saw in the last elections, and if it's widespread like we saw in the last elections, and if a lot of the processes do not work or probably have been manipulated, as some of the past speakers have said, or actually, there was a risk that the process was manipulated, the Beavers, the IREF things, those platforms, if there is a significant risk that those processes were manipulated, I think what we need to do is to say we will not accept these elections, whether the results will have been different or not. But for the fact that these things are major threats to the integrity of constitutional democracy, we should lay down the marker. This is not the way we want to go. This is not what we want to encourage. This is not how elections should be run. We need to go and redo these things and ensure that these problems do not occur again. I think when we begin to rejig the framework for our electoral system in this matter, so that we show that we are taking the integrity of the electoral process very seriously. Once we're able to do that, I am sure we will overcome these problems that we have now, where it is difficult, even where there is significant proof that elections have been rigged. We would overcome the difficulty of overcoming those elections. I think that's what we need, the conversations we need to have going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. And finally, Dr. Sam, over to you for your final thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. Mine is not very different from what Mr. Joseph said. This excessive judicialization of our electoral process is worrisome. And the challenges that petitioners face at the tribunal, up to the Supreme Court, in most cases, is actually very discouraging. if you look at the judicial system, especially the onus of proof placed upon petitioners, it is a situation whereby politicians have hijacked the process because they say, go and win first. Is win at all costs. And the next thing is, let's meet at the court. Let's go to the tribunals. And there you start seeing all sorts of technicalities. You time frame, this one is statute bad, this one is an expert evidence, the conditions have not been met. You have to call witnesses from every polling unit. All those things. Somebody has gone through the rigors of an election. He has actually been a victim of electoral injustice. And then he faces another challenge in trying to prove his matter. I think it's an issue, and I'm very much in agreement with Mr. Joseph that this whole architecture of our dispute resolution, electoral dispute resolution, has to be overhauled. And this begins with a kind of judicial reform, whereby our judges begin to take a stand that is in tune with the tenets of democracy. Then another thing for me, for reflection, is the appointment method in INEC. How are these commissioners appointed?
Dr. Sam, you're on mute. You'll need to unmute because you're inaudible.
Oh, sorry. That means you have not been hearing me, right?
No, only for like 2 or 3 seconds. So please continue.
Okay, fine. So I said, that is what we need to do to actually overhaul the entire architecture of our electoral dispute resolution. And then the next thing for me is the appointment pattern, the process of appointment of these INEC officials, right from the chairman to the recs to the national commissioners. If you look at the process, it tells you from the beginning that the independence and neutrality of INEC is compromised. You have a situation where people who are visibly, obviously with partisan backgrounds are appointed. The last time we had the appointment of recs, people who obviously are card-carrying members of a particular political party were appointed. CSOs complained, shouted, protested, wrote letters, yet they were appointed. Even political parties in some states protested, evidence that there were even gubernatorial candidates at previous election. So until we begin to see the need to change, to overhaul the entire appointment process, I think the Uwais panel always recommended that. So we have to, because if you cannot have independence where the appointment process remains the same. And then what of a kind of electoral justice, again, in terms of prosecution of electoral offenders? INEC itself, that has the responsibility now, is saying we can't handle this. You see a situation where INEC does not arrest. Police makes the arrest. Police does not prosecute unless they take. As it is now, it calls for synergy between the police and INEC, other security agencies. There's this move to establish the National Electoral Offences Commission. That also is a matter of debate, whether it is necessary, whether what we have now cannot take care of it. But whatever angle we look at it from, it is necessary that administration of electoral justice should be overhauled and strengthened so that people do not go without any punishment when they commit electoral offenses. Then technology, again, whether we like it or not, the gains are legion, but the process. So we need to start talking to ourselves. There should be sensitization, and this should begin from INEC. Yes, Nigerians have high hopes, or they had, but this trust they had before the elections can still be rekindled, can still be reawakened in a way that we can make progress. If you look at the pattern of election, the technological innovation, you conclude that, look, this is actually commendable, but it should be devoid of any form of sabotage. And those found culpable should be made to face the consequences of their actions, yeah, at least for the future. Then I will now say security, election security. Every person is a stakeholder in this. Nigerians should not leave it to security agencies alone. You know, one police AIG said at a forum that even the police need security, and people were laughing. A police officer that is going to a place that is strange, is a new person there. He needs intelligence, he needs information. Because when you see during elections, we deploy officers across the country, usually to areas that are not, they are not conversant with. So Nigerians should be able, and one of the challenges you even see that when offenders are being prosecuted, those who will ordinarily come out as witnesses are not willing to. So if you are not willing to come as a witness, how do we secure conviction for this conviction of these electoral offenders? So on the whole, I would say that there should be this moral reorientation among Nigerians in a way that all of us work together. You do yours, I do my part. And when we do that, there is hope for Nigerian democracy. We are making progress. So we shouldn't lose hope in our democracy. We shouldn't lose hope in the process. Every person should play his or her part. The institutions should be awake to their responsibilities, and the citizens as well. And when we do that, definitely there's light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. And look, we have come to the end of the show today. We've massively overrun in terms of time, but that's because it's been such a wonderful discussion. So many, really, really important and very, very enlightening insights that you've all shared today. So on behalf of our foundation, I'd like to thank you all for giving up your precious time to participate in today's show and in discussion today. To yourself, Mr. Joseph, to yourself, Dr. Sam, thank you so much. And to Gloria and Mujirayo, who, I don't think they're here anymore, but we want to send the thanks out to them as well. And special recognition also to Joyce, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but I know that she's here in spirit. So thank you to her. Thank you to all our conveners. Thank you to Dominic, who has, made so much efforts to ensure that, we are able to actually host, today's discussion. So thank you to him. And I sort of want to say that what conversations like this will hopefully do is it will help us build those coalitions, build those bridges that we need to put in place to create a strong sense of nationhood that we're so desperately crying out for. I think once we begin to build these coalitions, build these ladders that bring us closer together, and start to sort of promote this idea of economic success, I think that the narrative then starts to change. And I think that responsibility is one that we all share. So I'm encouraged by the fact that people like yourselves, I'm sure you have lots of things you could be doing, but people like you are giving up your time to have these kind of conversations, and you have the passion that you have towards trying to make a Nigeria a better nation for all of us. So thank you once again for your time. I'll bring the show to a close now, and hopefully I'll see you all again, and our paths will cross again in the near future. Take care and have a wonderful evening to you both.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a productive time, and I hope this would lead us somewhere closer to where we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dominic,
thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you, Dr. Sam. Dominic, did you want to say any final words before we close?
I hope, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, okay. So this is interesting. I have been trying to speak all along and it never came on. And now that the show is over,
Never
anyway,
too late.
I'm telling you, I just want to say a very, very big thank you, a very big thank you to, Mr. Joseph Ote, who I've known him for several years, and I appreciate the fact that he stayed commitment to the justice work. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for making out the time to be here. Thank you, Dr. Sam Oguche. Thank you very much. Thank you to Mujirayo, and then thank you to Gloria. I'm very grateful. And then thank you also to Joyce. Joyce was supposed to have been here, like you mentioned. Of course, when political expediency, calls, you honor. And I want to say a very big thank you to God, because truth is, a lot of things can go wrong at the last minute. And anything that could have gone wrong actually went wrong, but we're still able to, have this. And then for you, Solomon, you're supposed to be somewhere right now, but you're there. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate. I thank you for the sacrifice. I thank you for everything. Now, one of the important reasons we had to hold this conversation, as I wrap up quickly, is the fact that there's a lot of propaganda out there. There's a lot of propaganda out there. It's important to keep the real conversation alive, to say, look, this is what actually happened. You cannot pull the wool over people's faces. No. There was a flawed election. The issues in that election are before the courts, and the judiciary must stand up for the citizens and do justice based on free, fair, credible requirements of an election, not technicalities of some sort or whatever. So it's very important that we continue to have this conversation, and hopefully in the near future, not too distant, we're able to fix a system where everybody is a beneficiary of that which is good, and not just some balloon, that we have. Can you still hear me? I think I should wrap up now because my network seems like it's fluctuating.
No, you're still good. We can still hear you.
All right. Okay. So basically the conclusion is the citizens will need to continue to have the conversation. Like Gloria said, the citizens can take up a collective action to hold the government accountable, to hold INEC accountable. They can come together. The civil society needs to bring the citizens together to say, you know what, let us hold government accountable. I think Gloria spoke to that a lot. The judiciary must step up. The institutions of government must step up and do right by the people, not by individuals, by the people. Protect the constitution that you swore to protect. Protect the laws of our land that you swore to protect. And then finally, I want to thank our participants who is watching, who is listening. I know that we're streaming live on YouTube, we're streaming live on LinkedIn, and we're streaming on Clubhouse. So I thank everyone. I thank everyone who has, who has been a part of this. Thank you very much. Take the links, because the links, they are recorded. Share the links, pass them across so that people will understand these are the real issues. Forget all of the propaganda going on social media. Forget, these are the real issues. Let's hold government accountable. Thank you very much, and God bless us. Solomon, over to you, please. You can close us out. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean that I think that's a wonderful note to end on. That is the sentiment I want to leave us with as we leave here today and you know go about our evenings and hopefully you know the right thing will happen over the
Amen.
next few weeks. So I you know I bid you all a good evening and God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just this.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
All right, you too, sir.